Did I touch it? Click it again.
Okay, we're live.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Ariana Orn, SCSP's Director for Communications and Public Affairs. This week, we're launching a special week-long Lunch and Learn series to explore SCSP's September report, Generative AI, the Future of Innovation Power. Before we jump into the material, I want to provide you with a brief overview of SCSP if this is your first time interacting with us. Welcome. SCSP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit project with a clear mission to make recommendations to strengthen America's long-term competitiveness as artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies are reshaping our national security, economy, and society. We want to ensure that America is positioned and organized to win the techno-economic competition between now and 2030, the critical window for shaping the future. SCSP is inspired by the Rockefeller Special Studies Project, or SSP. We see the same potential in SCSP at an equally critical moment for our nation. SCSP builds on the work of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, or NSCAI, which ended its congressionally mandated work in October of 2021. NSCAI made recommendations to the President and Congress to advance the development of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and associated technologies to comprehensively address the national security and defense needs of the United States. For this next week, we will be hosting a series, Lunch and Learn, exploring the implications of generative AI on national security. Each day at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, join us and different authors of SCSP's recent fall report for a deeper dive into generative AI and national security. Today's episode of Lunch and Learn, exploring the implications of generative AI on national security, will focus on our first memo, Innovation Power for the Generative AI Flywheel, from SCSP's September report. Joining me for today's conversation are my colleagues, David Lin and Abigail Kakura from the Future Technology Platforms panel. Let's start the conversation with each of you telling us a bit about yourselves. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Ariana. Hello, everyone. My name is David Lin. I'm the Senior Director for our Future Technologies Platform team. I'm joining SCSP after 12 years in the U.S. government, where I worked across the interagency, but most recently as a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Department of State, where I was posted overseas in China and Shanghai and worked on China and technology issues. And now I have this great opportunity to work at SCSP, focused on the building U.S. competitive advantage in the tech competition. So glad to be here.
And Abby?
Thanks, Ariana. Thanks, David. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am Abby Kakura. I am a director with the Future Technology Platforms panel at SCSP. I came to SCSP after about a decade working on international security and strategy in think tanks and strategy consulting firms. And then a brief stint in grad school, coming back to DC.
Awesome. So David, if we could start maybe and set the scene as to why SCSP has even been writing these memos, a brief overview.
No, for sure. So the report is premised around this idea of innovation power. This goes for the overarching report across SCSP. It's premised around this idea of innovation power, which we define as the ability of a nation to invent, adapt, and adopt new technologies. And we believe this will be one of the key factors in the future of the tech competition, and generative AI will be a very strategic but important augmenting tool in this great power tech competition. And as each nation pursues their own form of innovation power, generative AI will be one of those unique tools that will change the way nations innovate. So as a general framing of the overall SCSP Gen AI report, we outlined several principles, objectives, and key strategic moves around which we're framing our discussion here across the board on generative AI. So 2 principles to guide U.S. actions we call out as global leadership in Gen AI should be a national security priority. And what we mean by that is that AI broadly, or Gen AI more specifically, play a unique role in leveraging not just hard military and intelligence capabilities, but economic and technological leadership. A second principle that will guide U.S. action, that should guide U.S. action in all of this, is that winning the platform competition is critical for our national prosperity. As we've discussed before in previous reports, U.S. firms for the time being are leading the world in Gen AI and the development of large language models. But amid the tech competition, the PRC and other rival nations are fielding LLMs with the ambition of being peer competitors. And so we shouldn't let that be a reason to be complacent in the overall Gen AI competition. So those are our two principles that to guide U.S. action. We go on to lay out two objectives that will define success. First, and both of them are premised around working closer with our allies and partners. So the first is that the U.S. together with our allies and partners should lead in AI innovation. And so the U.S. should seize on this moment, this transformative moment in the evolution of artificial intelligence and generative AI to work with our allies and partners to strengthen collective competitive advantage. And at the same time, also work with our allies and partners to avoid a destabilizing AI arms race. Working with our partners, for example, to promote transparency, foster trust, and encourage more collaboration. So those are our two objectives that we're going for. And finally, we propose three moves to reach these objectives. One is set the conditions, shape the terrain, and accelerate implementation. So under set the conditions, there's a number of ways that we posit that the USG can make the operating environment in the US more rich for Gen AI innovation. Things such as making large data sets more freely available to the innovation ecosystem, to technologists and innovators, finding ways to get researchers better and quicker and more access to the resources they need, like compute power and those kinds of resources. And then from the USG perspective, making targeted investments, particularly in areas where private capital may be lacking. So those are sort of some of the attributes or some of the form factors under setting the conditions. The second objective or the second move that we think the US should take to reach some of these end goals is shaping the terrain. And by that, we just mean bringing together all nodes of the innovation ecosystem and set responsible rules of the road. And then third, finally, accelerate implementation. And what we mean there is that the USG needs to think hard about how to incorporate Gen AI into everyday government functions or run the risk of falling behind our geopolitical rivals. And that's something we're seeing particularly some departments and agencies within the government taking a proactive stance and leaning forward and leaning in to experimenting with ways to make Gen AI work for national security applications. And that's something we're really supportive of. And we also want to be part of the discussion on brainstorming how we can use Gen AI for these kinds of applications. So
great. Yeah. Thank you, David. Abby, if maybe we can move over to what the core idea of what your team's specific memo was. The title of your team's work is Innovation Power for the Generative AI Flywheel. Maybe if you could give us a brief overview of what that portion of the report is about.
Absolutely. So the thesis of our memo is really stemming from this idea of innovation power. And we look at generative AI as the catalyst that will really unlock a flywheel and drive innovation power that will ultimately take the form of military advantage, economic might, and cultural influence. And the United States has an edge in this competition today, as David was talking about, but the stakes of this are so high that we can't leave it to chance. So what we do in our memo is we first set the scene of what this flywheel actually means, and then we recommend moves the United States can make to organize, unite around audacious technology goals, and resource the research and development that is needed to truly bolster the nation's innovation power for the age of AI.
David, I want to step back to something that Abby just said, which is how the flywheel is, what it means. When your team was building this report, I would love to know a little bit of how we coined the term Gen AI flywheel, how we put this concept together, and then maybe explain to the audience how we can sort of break down these complex topics in a visual image, such as a flywheel that you guys have proposed.
And for sure, I remember we were kind of storyboarding how our chapter in the Gen AI memo was going to flow, and we had some slides up, and we're kind of exploring the core parts of the core inputs of Gen AI and trying to identify what some of the core outputs are. And we're like, okay, so compute, data, resources, these are all inputs into the Gen AI, machine. And what are some of the outputs that could derive from it? So we're like, okay, so maybe, this could help government policymakers make better decisions, help formulate strategies, and ultimately help them better rack and stack and prioritize how they disperse government resources. And the more we got to talking about this, the more cyclical this whole process seemed to be. And so it lended itself to this idea of a flywheel. And the idea of an innovation flywheel is a concept that folks have talked about a lot in the innovation ecosystem before. But we've taken this concept of innovation flywheel and added almost a more kind of a policy spin to it to kind of underscore the interplay between the technology and the policy process. So our concept of the generative AI flywheel really applies to AI more broadly, just as much as it does Gen AI more specifically. And so, like I said, as we dug into Gen AI as a tool for innovation, we came to appreciate how Gen AI could be used as a tool to really change the actual nature of how R&D is done and how innovation itself comes about. And so the cycle breaks down into 4 different stages. First, Gen AI converges with other strategic sectors like biotech, advanced manufacturing, energy, and can really augment the way each of those sectors evolve. And each of the players within those sectors innovate. And so has this converging effect across industrial sectors. So that was one step in this flywheel of Gen AI. The second, these innovations, as they're applied and as they're carried out, will essentially change the way the world fundamentally works and help society see the immense potential of AI. And this moves to the third part of the flywheel where it drives organizations to change the way they behave, change the way they prioritize, strategize, and leverage the value of generative AI. And then the fourth and final stage of this is as organizations come to grapple with the true impacts and implications of generative AI, they start to prioritize, or the hope is that they will start to prioritize resources such as the investments they make into resources such as computing hardware, algorithms, data, and talent in different ways. And the cumulative effect of all this is that it's self-iterative and it starts to cycle backwards. And hopefully, if it all goes as planned, innovation will beget new innovations.
It's a really neat visual. Abby, I want to shift just a little to some items that are happening today. And today on the Hill, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is hosting his second AI Insight Forum. And this one will be focused on innovation. So maybe with this in mind, could you touch on some of the work that we're seeing happen and what SCSP's thoughts are on the latest AI developments?
Absolutely. So today we're at the end of October 2023, but let's think back to a year ago. End of November 2022 was the public release of ChatGPT. And taking stock of the past year, it's really remarkable how much has changed, but then also how much change still is yet to come. I think in terms of technical developments, what's been really astonishing is just the accelerating pace of AI research. And there's a few reasons for this. In part, the largest players are starting to compete for customers. There's also a growing community of startups that have emerged on the scene. And then open source AI models are proliferating and expanding the pool of actors that can easily access these types of tools. And with this, we're also seeing innovation at all layers of the AI stack, from the data that models are trained on to algorithmic tweaks to make models more efficient, and even some ways to overcome some of the structural limitations of transformer architectures that by, for example, connecting models to plugins that can retrieve external information. And I think what we're really starting to see is the beginning of this era where generative AI is a new human-machine interface for software, and also a new interface between machines that can stitch together a number of different software tools. And we're really at the beginning of this. And I think we're also sort of at that organizational piece of the flywheel where we're in sort of a period of calibration where organizations of all sizes have started to experiment with AI, with generative AI tools, but now comes the hard work of actually trying to integrate these tools into their systems. I think for now, maybe that looks like a little bit of a step back, but over time, it looks like actual more integration and adoption of AI tools as organizations go through this sort of calibration period. So overall, 1 year in, I think we've probably seen about almost one turn of the Gen AI flywheel. And we do think it will accelerate, but the impact on innovation power is going to accrue over years rather than months.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you a question that sort of builds upon the opportunities that you mentioned. And for both of you, if you wouldn't mind commenting, your memo talks a lot about generative AI converging with other sectors of science and technology. So where are you already seeing this happening? And then what other opportunities are you seeing on the horizon now?
Definitely. I think I'll start with this one and talk a little bit about two of the areas I've been focused on recently. So biotechnology, I think, is an area where we're really starting to see a lot of interesting convergence and the potential for AI to transform sort of all aspects of this other general purpose technology. And this convergence is occurring everywhere from lab automation to novel drug discovery to rapid trialing and potentially personalized medical treatments. If we look back a few years at the impact that AlphaFold has had on AI-enabled drug discovery, just 2 years after it was published, we're really starting to see drugs really go through the cycle of production, and that were generated at least in part by AI, or some of that discovery occurred using AI tools. And I think there's the ways that AI could transform biotechnology are pretty profound. Anything from discovering new ways to manufacture things to the biomedicine space. It's a really exciting opportunity space. And then one other area that we've been working on is advanced compute and microelectronics. And I think here, this is where we start to see AI transform its own technological underpinnings, from computing hardware to algorithms to data. People are using generative AI to write code and creating personalized compute capabilities and entirely novel data sets, AI-generated data sets. And on the hardware side, AI can be used to aid in the discovery of new chip designs, new compute paradigms, and this is really going to have a profound impact on the field itself.
Yeah, like to add on that, another sector we've been looking into has been the energy sector. And AI and generative AI have both near and longer term implications for the sector, I think. Over the longer term, it could and is starting to drive fusion science forward by already helping control the new nuclear fusion reaction within tokamak. Over the nearer term, AI applications, and I think this applies not just to energy, but across multiple industrial sectors. AI is already facilitating just general optimization, network optimization, increasing efficiencies in energy transmission, if we're talking about the energy sector specifically. And a lot of these, I think, are low-hanging fruit applications for AI in these industrial sectors to optimization and network optimization. So those are some both near and longer term things that Gen AI can help us accomplish.
Yeah. So let's jump into the report's recommendations that you guys have put forward. David, what's the bottom line? How is the U.S. government going to organize for this era? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so we broke out our memo into 3 key sections: organize, drive, and fuel. And I can talk about the organize section, and Abby can talk about the 2 latter sections. But organize is, I think, a common theme across a lot of our SCSP products, which is that in order to compete, the U.S. as a nation, across not just the government, but across the innovation ecosystem, we have to get organized. And so we make a couple top-line organizational recommendations in our chapter of the memo. For example, in order to better organize to support the innovation ecosystem, the government needs to establish an institutional home for a national technology strategy process that lasts across administrations. And this is building off of some recommendations that the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence also put forth. The creation or stand-up of a Technology Competitiveness Council, Office of Global Competition Analysis. These are some of the high-level organizations that we think would be required to help maintain and lengthen the lead the U.S. has in this AI tech competition. And some other recommendations we put forth in our memo is just things like ensuring that our senior leaders are up to speed with the latest and greatest technologies, such as generative AI. When Gen AI first hit the stage, we saw a lot of appetite and a lot of desire for senior policymakers to get really smart up and down to the nuts and bolts of how all this works. This is something that we're seeing the Senate take up with Schumer's AI Insights Forum. And so one of the proposals that we put forth is just having this kind of educational process more institutionalized and having it happen more periodically and regularly scheduled across the government. And then finally, a third recommendation is just building long-lasting bridges between basic research and the problem-solving corners of the innovation ecosystem through new models of public-private partnerships, especially within the U.S. National Laboratory System, which we see as a great U.S. government resource that has a lot of latent potential that could be better utilized across the innovation ecosystem.
Yeah. And then the memo goes on to continue to recommend a set of moonshots. Abby, could you explain the logic of why we would need these moonshots?
Yeah, I think the real logic here is that moonshots are not a new phenomenon in the U.S. innovation ecosystem. From the Apollo program in the 1960s to Operation Warp Speed to contain and address the COVID pandemic, our nation has proven time and again that we're able to come together and achieve things that seem impossible when the moment has demanded it. And we think that we need to rediscover this sense of unified national purpose and urgency to drive this next generation of innovation in the AI era and really shore up U.S. innovation power. And this requires the White House and Congress to really come together and cooperate on national security focused, government-led moonshots that have clear goals, leadership, and resourcing.
Could you provide our listeners maybe with some of the specific moonshot ideas that you've recommended?
So we offer a handful of specific moonshot ideas that we think would help us shore up U.S. innovation power, that would harness the immense potential of generative AI and also help mitigate against some of the most pressing risks of this era. So one idea we recommend is an alpha strategy. So think of this as a suite of AI models for each of the instruments of power that sort of combine insights for national security decision advantage. This is a high bar for what it could look like for national security decision making in the AI era. And another idea is an S&T platform, a science and technology platform for innovation advantage. So sort of taking that same idea, but applying it to our innovation ecosystem. How can we come up with a platform that combines the data, talent, and resources across our innovation ecosystem to accelerate all stages of scientific discovery in the scientific process? And then the third idea is something called a national medical shield. And the idea here is to stitch together using AI-enabled tools stitch together innovations for pathogen detection and response, many of which are already occurring across our innovation ecosystem. And the COVID-19 pandemic really underscored the need for a robust, integrated biodefense program that operates like a shield for the nation against future pathogen threats. And a lot of people will talk about how AI-enabled biotechnology will increase the risks of malign or misuse of these tools. And that is certainly a real risk that we need to be thinking about. But what we're trying to offer here is the idea that we can also leverage AI to help develop a security baseline to make us feel comfortable in that world. And then finally, just one other point I'll touch on there is that we recommend generative AI be thought of as a tool of first resort for moonshots in general. AI can serve as a helpful tool for existing moonshots or hard challenges that the government has articulated, be they the cancer moonshot or climate change. So for those bold goals, and as we set other ones, we say we should be encouraging the nation's best and brightest to identify ways for generative AI to help move the needle on those issues. And I think there are some really great examples of this already happening in the private sector and in other corners of our innovation ecosystem on a smaller scale. Just one example is the Vesuvius Challenge, where tech philanthropists have come together to create a contest for researchers to figure out how to use AI to read ancient Roman scrolls that we haven't been able to open since the volcano eruption on Mount Vesuvius. So there's really cool things like that that are already happening, but how do we capitalize on this and sort of do this at a larger, more national scale?
And just one last question for you, David. The final section of your of your memo discusses the U.S. government and how it can fuel this Gen AI flywheel. So can you tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about the role of government R&D in this AI era?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, R&D and the talent and the workforce that does it is really the lifeblood of innovation and innovation power. We tee up a couple policy proposals along these lines, which include fully funding the science portion of CHIPS and Science, increasing the USG's overarching R&D budget to push it toward 1% of GDP by 2026, and two other policy proposals, which include just creating a vehicle for more predictable government R&D funding, because that's something that we're hearing from a lot of smaller startups, that the unpredictability of the government budgetary cycle affects their ability to scale and ramp up. And then developing more agile processes for the USG to disperse its funds to the innovators that need it. We hear both from government folks and from startups alike saying how they want to work together. And the idea is to start to break down some of these barriers that preclude them from working, or to make it easier for them to access government resources and making it easier for the government to access the innovation that these startups are bringing to the table. So an incredibly important part of the innovation, of building an innovation power, is this R&D piece, and something that we're trying to push forward.
Great. Well, a huge thank you to David Lin and Abigail Kakura of our Future Technology Platforms team here at SCSP, and also for kicking off our week-long series, Lunch and Learn, exploring the implications of generative AI on national security. We hope that you'll join us for the next 6 days at 12 p.m. Eastern Time here on LinkedIn, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Ariana.
Thanks.